I was working the front desk at a hotel in Amsterdam when an American guest walked up to me at midnight. She looked frustrated. She held up her phone and said, "Your address is wrong. My GPS can't find this place." I looked at her phone. She had typed in the address perfectly. I said, "Ma'am, you're standing in the lobby right now." She stared at me. Then at her phone. Then back at me. "But it says I'm still 20 minutes away." I realized what happened. Her phone was still set to walking directions from the airport. She had taken a taxi here an hour ago. She was literally inside the building her GPS was trying to guide her to. I explained this as gently as I could. She looked embarrassed for a second. Then she said, "Well, should have signs outside that say you have arrived." I just nodded and checked her in that same week. My coworker told me about a guest who complained that nobody in Amsterdam spoke American. Not English. American. He insisted they were different languages. When my coworker tried to explain that American English and British English are dialects of the same language, the guy said, "Then why can't I understand anyone here?" My coworker said, "Sir, everyone here speaks English fluently." The guest shook his head. "No, they speak European." I didn't know what to say to that. Another guest asked me where she could exchange her dollars for euros. I pointed to the currency exchange across the street. She looked confused. She said, "Do they take American dollars?" I said, "Yes, that's what currency exchange means." She wasn't convinced. But how will they know what American dollars are worth? I blinked. They check the exchange rate. She frowned like I was the one being difficult. I just think it's weird that people here use fake money instead of real money. I asked what she meant by fake money. She said, "Euros. They're not real. Dollars are real money." I tried explaining that euros are the official currency of most of Europe. She nodded slowly, but I could tell she didn't really believe me. She exchanged her money anyway. She kept calling euros monopoly money for the rest of her stay. My manager once dealt with a guest who wanted to pay his bill in dollars. My manager explained we only accept euros or cards. The guest got annoyed. He said, "This is discrimination. You have to accept American currency everywhere." My manager said, "Sir, this is the Netherlands." Guest replied, "Exactly. The Netherlands is part of NATO. That means you have to take dollars." My manager just processed his card payment and smiled. Some battles aren't worth fighting. But my favorite story from that month was the couple who asked me what time zone Amsterdam was in. I said Central European time. The husband looked suspicious. He said, "Are you ahead of us or behind us?" I asked where they were from. He said Texas. I told him Amsterdam was 7 hours ahead. His wife gasped. 7 hours. How is that possible? I didn't know how to answer that. Time zones just exist. But she kept pressing me like I had invented them personally just to confuse her. Eventually, I just said, "The earth is round," and walked away. My friend works as a tour guide in Paris one day. An American tourist asked him how long it would take to drive to London. My friend said, "You can't drive directly because there's an ocean in the way. You'd need to take the Channel train or a ferry." The tourist looked annoyed. He pulled out his phone and showed my friend a map. "See, it's right there. Just a couple inches away." My friend tried explaining that the map scale didn't reflect driving time. The tourist wasn't having it. He said, "I drove farther than that in Texas last weekend." My friend gave up and just said, "Europe is smaller than it looks." The tourist nodded like that made sense. Another guide told me about a woman who asked if she could do a day trip from Paris to Rome, see the Colosseum, and be back by dinner. When the guide explained Rome was in a different country hundreds of miles away, the woman said, "But I thought Europe was small?" The guide said, "It's smaller than America, but it's not that small." The woman looked disappointed. She said, "Well, that's false advertising." One of my college friends studied abroad in Prague. She said an American student in her program asked the professor if they could visit Africa one weekend. The professor said Africa was an entire continent. The student said, "Yeah, but like, the main city." Professor didn't even know where to start. He just said there are 54 countries in Africa. Student looked amazed. "Wow, I thought it was just one big place." Another time in Barcelona, I watched an American tourist argue with a waiter about geography. The tourist insisted that Spain was in Mexico. The waiter said no, Spain is in Europe. The tourist pulled out his phone and showed the waiter a photo of a map. Except the map showed New Mexico. The tourist had confused New Mexico with actual Mexico, and then somehow decided Spain was there too. The waiter just walked away. Some arguments aren't worth your energy. My cousin worked at a train station in Brussels. An American traveler asked him what language they spoke in Belgium. My cousin said, "We have 3 official languages: Dutch, French, and German." The traveler looked suspicious. "Which one is real?" My cousin said, "They're all real." The traveler shook his head. "No, I mean, which one do you actually speak?" My cousin said, "I speak Dutch and French." The traveler squinted at him. At the same time, my cousin gave up and just said, "Yes." I met a bartender in Dublin who told me about an American tourist who asked him if Ireland was part of the United Kingdom. The bartender said no very firmly. The tourist said, "But you speak English, right?" The bartender said, "Yes, we speak English." The tourist nodded. "So you're part of England?" The bartender took a deep breath and explained Irish history as simply as possible. The tourist still looked confused. Finally, the tourist said, "So you're like the Texas of England?" The bartender just poured himself a drink. One summer I worked at an information desk in Vienna. An American woman asked me how to get to Australia. I thought she meant Austria at first. I started giving her directions to different Austrian cities. She stopped me and said, "No, Australia." "With kangaroos?" I realized my mistake. I said, "Ma'am, Australia is a continent on the other side of the world." She looked shocked. "It's not near here?" I showed her on a map. She stared at it for a long time. Then she said, "That's so far away." I agreed. She looked embarrassed and said, "I thought it was just a short flight." I asked where she got that idea. She said her friend told her Austria and Australia were close together because they sounded similar. I didn't have the heart to tell her, "That's not how geography works, eh?" Museum worker in Athens told me about an American tourist who asked if the Parthenon was a replica. The worker said no, it's the original structure from ancient Greece. The tourist said, "But it looks so old." The worker said, "It's over 2,000 years old." The tourist laughed. "No way. America isn't even that old." The worker just stared at him. Then he said, "Correct." The tourist didn't get it. My roommate in college went on a trip to Egypt. He said an American tourist at the pyramids asked the guide if the pyramids were built before or after Jesus. The guide said before. The tourist asked how that was possible. The guide said Egypt is one of the oldest civilizations in human history.
Oh.
The tourist looked amazed. "Older than America?" The guide said yes. The tourist said, "Wow, I didn't know that." My roommate said the guide looked exhausted. I was on a bus in Scotland when I overheard 2 American tourists talking. One of them said, "It's so weird that everyone here has an accent." The other one said, "I know. Why can't they just talk normal?" I wanted to say something, but I stayed quiet. A Scottish woman sitting near them looked at me and rolled her eyes. I shrugged. We both knew it wasn't worth the effort. I worked at a train station in Germany for one summer. An American traveler came up to me in a panic. He said he missed his train because the departure time was wrong. I asked to see his ticket. It said his train left at 1400 hours. I checked the time. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. I said, "Sir, 1400 hours is 2 o'clock p.m. Your train left 15 minutes ago." He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "What do you mean 1400 is 2 p.m.? I explained the 24-hour clock system. He shook his head. "That's ridiculous. Why don't you just use normal time?" I didn't know what to say. The 24-hour clock is normal for most of the world. I helped him book another ticket. He complained the entire time about how confusing European time was. My friend worked at a grocery store in London. An American customer asked her where the ranch dressing was. My friend said they didn't carry ranch dressing. The customer looked horrified. "How is that possible? What do people eat?" My friend said, "Other types of salad dressing." The customer shook her head. "That's so sad." Later that day, another American customer asked my friend, why all the eggs were on regular shelves instead of in the refrigerator. My friend explained that eggs don't need refrigeration in the UK because of different farming practices. The customer didn't believe her. She said, "Eggs go bad if you don't refrigerate them," my friend said. "Not these eggs." Customer bought them anyway, but kept saying she was nervous about getting sick. I visited a friend in Italy who worked at a restaurant. She told me about an American couple who got upset because their server kept bringing them sparkling water instead of regular water. My friend explained that, in Italy, you have to specify if you want still water or sparkling water. The couple said, "But water is just water," my friend tried to clarify. The couple insisted that sparkling water wasn't real water. They said it was soda. My friend gave up and just brought them still water. A guy I know worked at a hostel in Sweden. An American guest complained that there was no air conditioning. My friend explained that most buildings in Sweden don't have a C because the weather is mild. The guest said, "But what if it gets hot?" My friend said, "We open the windows." The guest looked skeptical. "That doesn't sound safe." My friend asked what she meant. The guest said someone could climb in. My friend explained that they were on the 4th floor. The guest still wasn't convinced. She asked if she could get a refund because of the lack of AC. My friend said no. The guest left a bad review anyway. I was at a cafe in Copenhagen when I heard an American tourist complain about the prices. He said everything costs twice as much as it should. His friend said maybe it's the conversion rate. The first guy said, "What's a conversion rate?" His friend tried to explain currency exchange. The first guy said that sounds like a scam. They argued about it for 10 minutes. Eventually, they just paid with a card and left. My sister studied abroad in Japan. She said an American student in her program got upset because Japanese people kept bowing to her. She thought they were making fun of her. My sister explained that bowing is a sign of respect in Japan. The student said, "But it feels weird." My sister said, "That's just how culture works." The student never really adjusted to it. She kept trying to shake hands instead. Most people just went along with it. But my sister said it was awkward every time. A coworker of mine vacationed in Greece. He said an American tourist at his hotel complained that the showers were weird. The tourist said there's no curtain. Water goes everywhere. My coworker explained that many European bathrooms are designed with drains in the floor for that reason. The tourist said, "That's so primitive." My coworker just shrugged. Different doesn't mean worse. I was on a train in Switzerland when an American passenger asked the conductor why the train was so quiet. The conductor said, "People prefer a peaceful environment." The passenger said, "But how do you know where you're going if no one talks?" The conductor pointed to the digital display showing upcoming stops. The passenger said, "Oh," and went back to his seat. A friend who worked at a hotel in Portugal told me about an American guest who requested a wake-up call at 7 a.m. My friend confirmed the request. The next morning, the guest called the front desk angry. He said, "You woke me up in the middle of the night." My friend checked the records. They had called him at 7 a.m., exactly as requested. The guest said, "Yeah, 7 a.m. Portugal time. I wanted 7 a.m. my time." My friend said, "Sir, you're in Portugal." The guest said, "I know, but my body is still on Texas time." My friend didn't know how to respond. The guest wanted an apology. My friend apologized just to end the conversation. Another hotel worker told me about an American family who complained that their room didn't have a coffee maker. The hotel was in France. The staff explained that French hotels typically don't have in-room coffee makers because there's a cafe downstairs. The family said, "That's so inconvenient." The staff offered to bring coffee to their room each morning. The family said that wasn't the same. They left a bad review saying the hotel was outdated. I worked at a car rental agency in Ireland one summer. An American customer wanted to rent a car. I explained that we drive on the left side of the road in Ireland. He said, I know. I asked if he had experience driving on the left. He said no, but how hard could it be? I made him sign extra liability waivers. He came back 3 hours later. He had sideswiped 2 parked cars and a fence. He said the roads here are backwards. I processed his insurance claim and suggested he take public transportation for the rest of his trip. My friend worked at a pharmacy in Canada. An American customer asked for Tylenol. My friend showed him the options. The customer looked at the labels and said, "These are all wrong. They don't say how many pills to take." My friend pointed to the dosage instructions. The customer said, "These are in milliliters. I need real measurements." My friend explained that milliliters are real measurements. The customer said, "Not in America." My friend didn't argue. He just helped the customer convert the dosage to a format he understood. The customer left shaking his head about how confusing Canada was. A tour guide in Norway told me about an American tourist who complained that all the road signs were in kilometers. The tourist said, "How am I supposed to know how far anything is?" The guide said, 1 kilometer is about 0.6 miles. The tourist said, "That's too complicated. Why don't you just use miles?" The guide said, "Because we use the metric system." The tourist said, "That's inconvenient for visitors." The guide just smiled and moved on with the tour. I was at a market in Spain when I heard an American tourist ask a vendor how much the tomatoes cost per pound. The vendor said they sell by the kilogram. The tourist looked confused. He said, "How many pounds is that?" The vendor said, "About 2.2 pounds per kilogram." The tourist said, "Can you just weigh them in pounds?" The vendor said no. The tourist bought the tomatoes anyway, kept muttering about how everything was confusing. My roommate worked at a clothing store in France. An American customer asked for a size 8 dress. My roommate showed her the European size chart. The customer said, "I don't understand this. Can't you just show me the real sizes?" My roommate explained that European sizing is different. The customer said, "But I'm a size 8. My roommate said that would be a size 38 or 40 here. The customer looked offended. 40? That sounds huge. My roommate tried to explain that the numbers mean different things in different systems. The customer didn't want to hear it. She left without buying anything. A guy I knew worked at a hardware store in Australia. An American customer asked for a wrench in inches. My guy said they only carried metric tools. The customer said, "Why would you do that?" My guy said, "Because Australia uses the metric system." The customer said, "That's un-American." My guy said, "Yes, that's the point." The customer didn't find it funny. He left and complained online about how backwards Australian hardware stores were. I was at a gas station in the UK when I saw an American driver trying to figure out the pump. He kept pressing buttons and looking frustrated. I asked if he needed help. He said, "This pump is broken. It won't show me how many gallons I'm getting." I explained that UK pumps show liters, not gallons. He said, "How am I supposed to know when to stop?" I said, "Just fill the tank." He said, "But I always get exactly 10 gallons. I didn't know what to say to that. I helped him convert liters to gallons. He still seemed upset about the whole thing. My cousin worked at a bakery in Germany. An American customer asked for a dozen donuts. My cousin said they sold donuts individually or in boxes of 6 or 10. The customer said, "A dozen is 12. "Everyone knows that," my cousin said. "We don't package them that way." The customer said, "That's false advertising." My cousin said, "We never advertise dozens." The customer bought 10 donuts and left annoyed. A barista in the Netherlands told me about an American customer who ordered a large coffee. The barista asked if he wanted the medium or large size. The customer said, "Large." I just said that. The barista showed him the sizes. The large was about 12 ounces. The customer said, "That's tiny." "That's like a small in America," the barista said. "This is our large." The customer said, "Do you have an American large?" The barista said no. The customer ordered 2 large coffees and complained that everything in Europe was smaller than it should be. I was in a grocery store in Belgium when I saw an American tourist struggling to read temperature labels on frozen food. He asked an employee why everything was -20 or -18. The employee said, "That's Celsius." The tourist said, "That sounds really cold." The employee said, "It is. That's how freezers work," the tourist said. "But in Fahrenheit?" The employee said, 0 degrees Celsius is 32 Fahrenheit. -18 Celsius is around 0 Fahrenheit. The tourist looked overwhelmed. He just grabbed a random item and left. My friend worked at a doctor's office in Sweden. An American patient came in for a checkup. The doctor measured his height at 180 centimeters. The patient said, "How tall is that in real numbers?" The doctor said, "About 5'11". The patient said, "Why didn't you just say that?" The doctor said, "Because we use centimeters." The patient shook his head. "That's going to take some getting used to," the doctor said. "You're only here for 2 weeks," the patient said. Still, I think my favorite story came from a friend who worked at an airport in Rome. An American passenger asked him what time her flight to New York was. He checked her ticket and said 21:30. She looked at him blankly. "When is that?" He said 9:30 p.m. She said, "Why didn't you just say that?" He said, "I did." She huffed and walked away. He watched her go and just shook his head. He told me later that he dealt with stuff like that every single day. It never stopped being strange. Another airport worker in Madrid told me about an American traveler who missed his flight because he didn't understand the boarding process. The worker explained that European airports board by group number or row number